My name is Lauren, and I became an expert at acting normal. Normal wife, normal smile, normal answers when people asked how I was doing. The worst beating happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Michael was arrested. We'd been invited to his company's annual dinner, one of those events where spouses were expected to dress up and smile, and make small talk with people who determined your husband's career trajectory. I'd bought a new dress, navy blue and conservative, the kind that said appropriate corporate wife without drawing too much attention. Michael hated it. "You look frumpy," he said when I came out of the bedroom, his eyes scanning me with that cold assessment I'd learned to dread. "Like you're trying to embarrass me." "I thought it was professional," I said carefully, already knowing this was going to escalate but hoping I could diffuse it. "I can change if you want." "Professional." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You look like someone's grandmother. Do you have any idea how this reflects on me? When my wife shows up looking like she doesn't even try?" I turned to go back to the bedroom, to find something else, anything else that might satisfy him, but I wasn't fast enough. His hand caught my arm, spun me around, and then his fist connected with my ribs. Not my face, never my face, where people could see but my torso, my back, places that would be covered by clothes. I doubled over, gasping, and he hit me again and again. His breath was steady, controlled, like this was just another task on his to-do list. When he finally stopped, I was on the floor, trying not to cry because crying made it worse. "Get up," he said, his voice flat. "Fix your makeup. We're leaving in 20 minutes. I pulled myself up using the edge of the bed, every breath sending sharp pain through my ribs. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at myself as red-faced, pale, hair disheveled. My torso was already starting to bruise, deep purple spreading across my ribcage. Michael appeared in the doorway, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at me in the mirror, his expression almost bored. "Act normal tonight, Lauren. Smile, be charming. If anyone asks why you're quiet, tell them you have a headache. And for God's sake, wear something that doesn't make me look like I married a nun." I changed into a different dress, black and fitted, the kind he preferred. I covered the redness around my eyes with concealer, applied lipstick with shaking hands, and styled my hair so it fell just right. I looked at myself in the mirror and practiced smiling until it looked genuine. At the dinner, I was perfect. I laughed at jokes, made conversation with Michael's boss's wife about her upcoming vacation, complimented the venue, and sipped wine slowly so I stayed sharp. Michael kept his hand on the small of my back, possessive and warm, and to everyone watching, we looked like the ideal couple. "You two are so sweet together," someone said, and Michael squeezed my waist right where the bruises were forming. I smiled through the pain. "We're very lucky," I said, and my voice didn't shake at all. On the drive home, Michael was pleased. "See, that wasn't so hard. You were great tonight. This is what I need from you, someone who makes me look good, who knows how to behave." I nodded, staring out the window at the dark streets passing by. My ribs throbbed with every breath, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought crystallized into certainty. I'm going to make sure he pays for this. Every bruise, every threat, every moment of terror. I'm going to act normal until the moment I destroy him. The next morning, while Michael was in the shower, I took photographs of my bruises, close-ups with timestamps. I wrote down exactly what had happened, the date, the time, his words, the number of times he'd hit me. I added it to the file I'd been keeping, hidden in an encrypted cloud storage account he didn't know existed. I'd been documenting for 8 months. This was just the latest entry. The documentation had started almost by accident, 9 months before Michael's arrest. I'd gone to the emergency room after a particularly bad incident where Michael had shoved me down the stairs. I'd told the nurse I'd tripped, a clumsy accident, nothing to worry about. But she'd looked at me with this expression, not quite believing me, but not pushing end. She'd noted in my chart, patient claims, accidental fall, bruising pattern, inconsistent with stated cause. I'd seen those notes when I requested my medical records weeks later for insurance purposes. That note, bruising pattern, inconsistent, had planted a seed. If a nurse could tell the difference between an accident and abuse, then there was a way to prove what Michael was doing to me. I started researching domestic violence forums, legal advice websites, survivor stories. I learned that leaving an abuser was often the most dangerous time, that restraining orders were paper shields that didn't always protect you, that without evidence it often became a he said she said situation that favored the person with more money and better lawyers, which was Michael. So I decided not to leave, not yet. Instead, I stayed, and I documented everything. I took photographs of every bruise, every mark, every injury. I dated them meticulously. I kept a journal in that same encrypted cloud account, recording incidents with clinical precision: date, time, what triggered him, what he said, what he did, what injuries resulted. I made copies of our financial records, showing the accounts he controlled that I had no access to, the credit cards in his name only, and the ways he'd structured our finances to keep me dependent. I also started recording audio. My phone was always in my pocket during arguments, recording app activated. I captured his voice, the threats, the insults, the cold calculation as he explained exactly how he'd make my life hell if I ever tried to leave. In our state, one-party consent meant these recordings were legal as long as I was part of the conversation. I visited the ER 2 more times over those months, always with the same story about being clumsy, always asking for copies of my records afterward. The documentation piled up, x-rays showing fractured ribs that were consistent with impact trauma, notes about bruising that didn't match my explanations, a pattern of injuries that told a story even when I wouldn't. I also reached out to a domestic violence organization through their anonymous hotline. They connected me with a legal advocate named Patricia, who specialized in helping victims build cases against their abusers. She didn't pressure me to leave. She understood that leaving without a plan could get me killed. Instead, she helped me understand what evidence would be strongest in court, what documentation I needed, and how to prepare for the moment when I was ready to act. "You're doing the right thing," Patricia told me during one of our secret phone calls, made while Michael was at work. "Building a case takes time, but it means when you're ready to leave, you'll have everything you need to make sure he can't hurt you again." I wasn't just planning to leave, I was planning to make sure Michael faced consequences. Real, legal consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life. I opened a bank account at a different bank, one Michael didn't use, and started depositing small amounts of cash whenever I could skim it without him noticing. $20 here, $50 there. Emergency money, escape money, survival money. I also contacted a divorce lawyer, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who offered free consultations for domestic violence victims. I met her during my lunch break, in her office across town, where Michael would never see me. I showed her everything: the photos, the recordings, the medical records, the journal entries. "This is one of the most comprehensive evidence packages I've ever seen," Elizabeth said, her expression serious. "With this, we can get a restraining order, file criminal charges, and ensure you're protected during the divorce proceedings." When I asked, "When can we do this?" "Whenever you're ready," she said. "But Lauren, you need to understand, the moment we file, everything changes. He'll know, and he'll be dangerous." "I know," I said. And I did. I'd been living with Michael's danger for 5 years, but I was tired of being afraid. I was ready to fight back. The plan came together over the next 3 months with the precision of a military operation. Elizabeth explained the process step by step. We'd file for a protective order and criminal charges simultaneously, catching Michael off guard. The evidence ID gathered would support both actions. The protective order would be granted based on the documented pattern of abuse, and the criminal charges would proceed with the police using the same evidence. But timing was crucial. We needed to file when Michael was at work during business hours so the police could arrest him in a controlled environment rather than at home, where he might have access to weapons or could hurt me before they arrived. We needed to ensure I was somewhere safe when everything happened, somewhere he couldn't reach me. Patricia helped me develop a safety plan. On the day we filed, I would take everything I couldn't replace: important documents, sentimental items, my laptop with all the backup evidence, and move it to a secure location. I'd stay with a friend Michael didn't know about, someone from my job that I'd confided in after years of keeping the abuse secret. That friend was Marissa, a colleague who'd noticed my flinching, my long sleeves in summer, the way I checked my phone constantly like I was afraid of missing a call. She'd pulled me aside one day and said, simply, "If you ever need help, I'm here." When I finally told her the truth, she didn't ask why I'd stayed or tell me to just leave. She said, "What do you need from me?" And meant it. I also needed to secure my job. Michael had always controlled our finances, but my income was in my name, and I needed to ensure he couldn't sabotage it. I met with HR confidentially, explained I was leaving an abusive situation, and asked what protections were available. They were more helpful than I expected. They could flag my file to prevent Michael from calling and getting information about me, could arrange for security to be notified if he tried to show up at my workplace, and could even help me adjust my schedule temporarily if needed for court appearances. The evidence continued to accumulate. 2 more incidents in those 3 months, both documented with the same meticulous detail. The physical abuse was getting worse. Michael's control was slipping as I became better at acting normal. As if he sensed something had changed, even if he couldn't identify what. One night, after he'd slammed my head against the kitchen counter for overcooking his dinner, he stood over me and said, "You know, I could kill you and nobody would question it. Accidents happen all the time." I recorded that, every word. I also gathered character witnesses, though they didn't know that's what they were. I'd started opening up carefully to a few people, my sister who I'd kept at arm's length for years because Michael isolated me from family. My doctor, whom I finally told the truth to about my injuries and ease, and a neighbor who'd heard yelling through the walls and had expressed concern. Each conversation was documented in my journal. Each person who expressed worry or offered help became part of the pattern of evidence, showing that multiple people had noticed something was wrong. Elizabeth filed the paperwork on a Thursday morning in late October, the protective order request, the divorce petition, and the police report with all evidence attached: photos, recordings, medical records, witness statements, and my detailed journal spanning 8 months. The police reviewed the evidence and agreed to arrest Michael on charges of domestic violence, assault, battery, and criminal threatening. Multiple counts, based on the documented incidents. The arrest was scheduled for Friday afternoon at Michael's office. Elizabeth coordinated with the police to ensure I was safely at Marissa's house, with a protective order already granted on an emergency basis before they took him into custody. Thursday night, I acted normally. I made dinner. I smiled when Michael talked about his day. I went to bed next to him, knowing it was the last time I'd ever have to sleep in the same room as the man who'd spent 5 years terrorizing me. Friday morning, I woke up early. Michael left for work at his usual time. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I started moving. Everything I'd packed in secret over the past week: clothes, documents, laptop, the few possessions that mattered went into my car. I drove to Marissa's house and waited. At 2:30 p.m., Elizabeth called. "The police are on their way to his office now. The protective order is active. You're safe." At 3:15 p.m., my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail came through. 30 seconds later, Michael's voice, shaking with rage. "What the fuck did you do? The police are here. Lauren, you're going to regret this." The voicemail cut off. I saved it. More evidence. Michael was arrested at 3:17 p.m. on a Friday in front of his entire office. I wasn't there to see it, but Elizabeth got the details from the police report. They'd walked into the building, asked for Michael by name at reception, and escorted him out in handcuffs. His co-workers watched. His boss watched. The perfect image he'd maintained: successful, controlled, respectable, shattered in front of everyone who'd ever looked up to him. He was charged with 3 counts of domestic violence assault, 2 counts of battery, and 1 count of criminal threatening. The bail hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. The protective order meant he couldn't contact me, couldn't come near me, couldn't even send messages through third parties. But Michael tried anyway. He had his mother call me Saturday morning. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail that I immediately forwarded to Elizabeth and the police. "Lauren, this is Barbara. Michael asked me to reach out. He's devastated by these accusations. He says you're making all of this up, that you two just had some arguments like all married couples do. He wants to talk to you, work things out. Please drop these charges. You're ruining his life over nothing." That voicemail became evidence of a protective order violation contact through a third party. His lawyer tried a different approach, calling Elizabeth directly. "My client is willing to enter counseling. He acknowledges there were some disagreements, and he's willing to work on communication. If Mrs. Patterson drops the criminal charges and agrees to marriage counseling, we can resolve this privately." Elizabeth's response was ice cold. "My client has documented evidence of 5 years of systematic abuse. Your client is facing criminal charges based on that evidence. There will be no counseling, no reconciliation, no dropping of charges. See you in court. The bail hearing on Monday morning was the first time I saw Michael since his arrest. He looked smaller somehow, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual expensive suits. His eyes found mine across the courtroom, and the look he gave me was pure hatred. The prosecutor presented evidence, the photos, the medical records, and excerpts from the recordings. The judge's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. Michael's lawyer argued he wasn't a flight risk, that he had strong ties to the community, and that he'd never been arrested before. He painted Michael as a successful professional who'd made some mistakes but wasn't dangerous. Then the prosecutor played a recording. Michael's voice, clear and cold. You know, I could kill you, and nobody would question it. Accidents happen all the time. The courtroom went silent. Bail is set at $100,000, the judge said. The defendant is to have no contact with the victim, direct or indirect. Any violation will result in immediate revocation of bail and additional charges. Michael's face went white. He couldn't afford that bail. Not immediately. He'd have to liquidate assets, ask family for help, and scramble to come up with the money. He'd spend at least several more days in jail. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. Elizabeth squeezed my shoulder. Phase 1 complete. Now we prepare for the trial. But there wouldn't be a trial. Michael's lawyer called 2 weeks later with a plea deal offer. Michael would plead guilty to reduced charges, accept a criminal record, serve 6 months in jail, attend a batterer intervention program, and agree not to contest the divorce or any of the asset division, Elizabeth proposed. He knows he can't win at trial, Elizabeth explained. The evidence is too strong. His lawyer told him a jury would convict on all counts, and he'd face years in prison instead of months. I want him to take the deal, I said. I don't want to sit through a trial. I want this over. The plea was accepted. Michael was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent protective order. The divorce was finalized while he was incarcerated. I got everything I asked for, including an equitable split of assets that actually favored me, since Elizabeth argued I deserved compensation for the years of abuse. Michael was released from jail on a Tuesday in April, exactly 6 months after his arrest. I know because his mother called Elizabeth's office, asking if I'd agreed to meet with him now that he'd served his time and learned his lesson. Elizabeth's response was brief. No, the protective order remains in effect. Any attempt to contact my client will result in additional criminal charges. I never saw him again. I didn't need to. The legal system had done what I needed it to do. It had held him accountable, given him a criminal record that would follow him for life, and ensured he couldn't hurt me again. I stayed with Marissa for 3 months after the arrest, until I found my own apartment in a different part of town. It was small but mean, a 1-bedroom with big windows and a doorman, someplace Michael couldn't access even if he tried. I went to therapy, working through 5 years of trauma with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence survivors. It was hard, exhausting work, confronting all the ways the abuse had shaped me, learning to trust my own instincts again, rebuilding my sense of self. I also started volunteering with the same domestic violence organization that had helped me, working with their legal advocacy program. I helped other women understand how to document abuse, how to build cases, and how to use the legal system to protect themselves. Every woman I helped felt like healing, like transforming my pain into something purposeful. A year after Michael's arrest, I ran into one of his former coworkers at a coffee shop. She recognized me, and I saw the moment she connected me with that situation at the office. I just wanted to say, she told me quietly, a lot of us had no idea what was happening. Michael seemed so normal, so professional. When he got arrested, we were shocked, but then we heard about the evidence, about what he'd done, and ... I'm so sorry. I wish we'd seen it sooner. He was very good at acting normal, I said. So was I. That was the point. She nodded, uncomfortable but sincere. For what it's worth, he doesn't work there anymore. They let him go when he was convicted. Last I heard, he's working retail somewhere. Can't get hired in his old field with a criminal record. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but mostly I just felt relief. Michael's life had consequences now. He couldn't pretend to be perfect anymore. Everyone who'd ever respected him knew the truth. I rebuilt my life slowly, deliberately. I reconnected with family I'd been isolated from. I made new friends who knew my story and supported me. I got a promotion at work, excelling now that I wasn't constantly afraid or exhausted from covering bruises. I even started dating again, carefully, taking things slow. The first time a date raised his voice during a minor disagreement, I felt that familiar panic, but then he immediately apologized, looked horrified at himself, and we had a conversation about healthy communication. He didn't get defensive or blame me. He just listened. That's when I knew I was healing. When I could recognize the difference between a normal human moment and the warning signs of abuse. When I trusted myself enough to walk away from anything that felt wrong and stay with something that felt safe. 2 years after Michael's arrest, I got a notification that the protective order was expiring. I had the option to renew it, but I didn't. Not because I forgave him or thought he'd changed, but because I didn't need it anymore. I built a life he had no access to, surrounded myself with people who would protect me, and developed the skills and confidence to protect myself. Michael had told me to act normally, thinking he could control me with fear and isolation. He thought normal meant submissive, silent, compliant, but I'd redefined normal for myself. Normal meant safe. Normal meant free. Normal meant waking up without fear, going to bed without checking locks 3 times, living a life where nobody's mood dictated my day. I acted normally, all right. I acted so normally that Michael never saw me documenting his crimes. Never suspected I was building the case that would end him. Never realized that the woman he was beating into submission was actually the architect of his destruction. He wanted me to smile and pretend, so I did. Right up until the moment the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. And then, I stopped acting. I started living.